Okay, so today is December 8th, 2009. No, it's not. It's January. January 8th, 2019. And this is what I would call part 3. So part 1 and 2 were kind of Bill and I leaving Medford and getting to Hawaii. And then we've been in Hawaii a little bit, so this is part 3. And I wanted to talk about Hawaii a little bit because we spent probably 5 months there living in this car. And so I wanted to back up a little bit and stick in a story that while we were staying at Uncle Joe and Aunt Bertha Jeffers' house on Cocoa Isle Circle, we went out one night, Bertha and Bill and I went out to kind of the North Shore, and I think it was called the Polynesian Culture Center. And it was kind of a show where they put on Hawaiian dances, and they danced in fire, and they had costumes, and did all kinds of different dances, Hawaiian dances. Really good show. Probably still going on today. But we went out there, and unbeknownst to us, there were a couple of young girls that kind of had their eye on Bill and I. And so I don't think Bill and I were really noticing it, but Aunt Bertha was noticing it. And so after the show, these gals came up, and they invited us to a luau in a couple of days, or something like that. And so we said, okay, fine, and they were staying at a house, and it sounded like it was going to be a family luau, and so we didn't really have any way to get there, and so we talked to Art, and we borrowed his Volkswagen Bug. And so we drove his Volkswagen. I'm not sure where they were. We were at Cocoa Isle Circle, and I know we drove around like to Hanauma Bay, Sandy Beach, and I believe the name of this town was Kailua, and I'm kind of guessing here. And they were staying in a house, so we found the address, and we got there, and we went inside, and we were kind of expecting this family luau thing. Well, what it ended up being was a bunch of Girl Scouts had come over from the mainland with their, den mothers or whatever you want to call it, and they were there for about a week, and they'd rented a house, and so they were having a luau that night, and so there was all these girls and these two den mothers and Bill and I, and so anyway, and they were all pretty young. They were pretty young, and so. So anyway, that was kind of a big laugh thing that happened, and so that was kind of within probably 2 or 3 weeks of when we got to Hawaii. So now back on kind of the part 3 thing of so Bill and I had this car and we were staying in it. And I kind of looked some stuff up on Google, and I thought it was Pier 41 we worked at, but it looks like it's Pier 40, and it's pretty much torn down now. You can kind of see where it was. I mean, there were a couple of dry dock places there where they could bring ships up out of the water, and I'm not even sure it's a military base anymore. It's kind of was on the edge of the water. So one of the things that was happening in 1970 was Vietnam was still going pretty good, and there were, back then the planes were 707s, and so they were 4-engine jet engine planes from the Air Force, so they didn't have to have mufflers on them, and they were taking off every 15 minutes from the airport to go to Vietnam. And we were working kind of right at the end of the airport. I looked on a map, and there's a little bit of water between there and the airport, but the point of the story was these planes were just screaming when they took off, probably loaded to the max, and they were barely clearing the roofs on these open air. The place we worked was kind of an open air, high metal roof building where all four walls, there weren't really walls. There were just like 6x6 posts going up about 20 feet and then trusses across. So it was open air, never really got cold there. And there were a couple of times I remember looking over at one of the other buildings that was on the base, and there was a 707 going over it, and I was thinking that, gosh, if you were up on that roof, you could almost jump up and touch the belly of that plane. It seemed like he was 8-10 feet clearing that building, and very loud going by. So one of the stories was we went out to this point one day. I'm going to spell it. It's Kaena point. And it was part of the road that really wasn't part of the road. In fact, they had a sign that said, go beyond this point at your own risk. The state of Hawaii doesn't maintain the road. I do remember going up this washboard. It was almost like stairs in rock. It was just rock. There wasn't really a road, and it was so bumpy that in a 64 Ford Falcon station wagon, there was actually a spare tire over on the right-hand side in this little compartment towards the back where the tailgate came out. And of course the car was very rusted, and that tire, the spare tire, actually fell out the bottom of the car onto I suppose you'd call it a road. And so I remember going back and getting it, putting it in the back of the car. And then we got to a mud puddle that was pretty big. And so I got out of the car and I walked up there and I was looking at it and I was thinking, oh, I don't know, this thing's pretty long. It seemed like it was like 40 feet long, and I didn't know how deep it was, but it looked pretty deep. And so all of a sudden I turn around, here comes Bill. He's doing about 40 miles an hour down this little road as we're coming back. We've gone out to the point and we're coming back now towards civilization. And he hits this mud puddle and he starts planing and he barely doesn't quite make it through, and it dies at the end of it, and so it was overheating, and I had plenty of water in our mud puddle, so we're taking these cups and we're pouring it in the radiator again because the car was overheating. Seemed like it wasn't filling up, so I remember looking under the car and here the radiator hose had actually, the water hitting it had ripped it off pulled it off the bottom of the radiator, so all the water was just going through the radiator. So anyway, I fixed that, so that got it filled up. We went a ways farther and actually got a flat tire. And I don't remember the details of this, but I know I stayed with the car and Bill left for quite a while. So I'm thinking, I'm not thinking he took the tire with him, the spare tire with him. I think we did get it jacked up and got the tire off, but I'm not sure he took it with him. He ended up, later he told me he kind of got to this camping place where people were camping in tents, and he must have gotten somebody to give him a ride back to the car and then into town to a garage, got the tire patched and got back, and seems like that would have taken a long time, probably 4 or 5 hours, but we just weren't on any kind of time frame. So one of the problems we had with the car that I think it had a little crack in the block or something like that. And so one time when Bill was working his night job, I was at the Ala Moana Park, and I went and bought some of this, radiator clog stuff that fixes leaks or something, and I think I poured about twice as much of it in there as you were supposed to, and it kind of started boiling out around the exhaust pipe, so I took a bunch of paper towels and watered them up and started sticking it in there with sticks, and made evidently enough of a dam that this stuff actually sealed itself. So that was kind of a miracle. And so during this time, we were constantly working towards this trip. And so we had to get passports, and of course you can't get passports without birth certificates. Remember, Bill had lost his wallet, so he had no ID at all. So he was getting his ID refurbished through his parents, through the mail, back and forth. So I was doing the same thing with getting a birth certificate, and they mailed that over. And anyway, we went to get a passport, and I had to fill out these forms, and of course you got to get passport pictures, so you had to go to a photographer. Back then you had to go to a separate photography place. So of course none of this stuff happened all at once. It was, you just kind of go and learn as you go. And so, maybe a week would go by, and then we'd have to go to we went down to the state of Hawaii government buildings to get passport applications. Then maybe the next week we went down and got, I probably had to write letters to our folks to get our birth certificates, and then we had to go get passport pictures taken at a professional passport photography place. They used to have those back then. And so we got all that and started putting all that together, and so we started looking at how are we going to get to Australia. And so we went out to the airport. One trip would go out to the airport and check with all the airlines and stuff like that. And it seemed like it was about a, 8 or 9 hour flight, something like that, from Hawaii. And it was about 500 and something bucks. And so Bill was the one that actually said, I think he said he found this boat place, like a cruise, P&O cruise office or something, kind of down by the Aloha Tower, which I think then was around Pier 10. And so again, gotta go do this stuff. It seemed like, I'm not sure we were doing something every night when we got off work, but we were, at least once a week, we were doing something towards this trip. And so we ended up going down to this P&O place, and they had a ship leaving Honolulu and going to Sydney, Australia on January 4th, 1971. So our job was going to last to about December 10th. And so I think it was like $391, and got on this, so we decided to do that because we weren't on a time frame, and it was like we couldn't believe it. It was like $391. I think it was like a 17-day cruise, and it included, all your food and room and board and pretty much everything. And so we thought, well, why not? So we found out that this cruise ship was actually doing a round robin from like Sydney to Auckland up to some island. I don't know if it was Fiji or not, but probably some island, and then up to Honolulu, and then we were just catching the back end of it. And so pretty much everybody, I think there were like 5 Americans on the boat, but everybody else, 1,200 passengers, they were Australian. And so we got around November. It seemed like it was getting a little bit cold, so we went down and joined the YMCA. I think it was like $20. And so then we could take hot showers, and they had a swimming pool and a bunch of stuff at the YMCA in Honolulu. So we kind of enjoyed that, and we'd go hang out there at night and, you know, watch a little TV or go swimming or take hot showers, and so that was fun. And then on New Year's Day, they had this big kind of a music festival, arts and crafts kind of thing in Diamond Head. When you see the pictures of Waikiki Beach with Diamond Head, actually that's a crater, and there's a tunnel that goes in there, and there was a crater in there. And so one of the things we did in December is we heard on the radio that you could volunteer on a Saturday to go up into the rainforest. They were putting a bunch of people together to go up in the rainforest and cut bamboo and haul bamboo down into this crater and just stack it up in piles, and then the people that built their booth that were selling stuff would tie these bamboo, they would cut it all up and make a place to sell their stuff out of bamboo. So Bill and I actually did that 2 weekends in a row, and that bamboo seemed like it was anywhere from 1.5 inches to about 3 inch, you know, and I think it really boiled down to like some people's private property, and they were just wanting to get the bamboo thinned out of there because it was just overgrowing and thick, and, you know, 25 feet high, so thick you could barely walk through it, really. And so we did that for a couple Saturdays, and then we went to this concert, I guess, on New Year's Day. I think it was free, and Santana ended up playing there. And so it was really big. I mean, if you could imagine if the crater, let's say, were, you know, 3 feet across, you know, 50,000 people would be about like that, a circle about 9 inches. So that's how big the crater was, and then 50,000 people were about a 9-inch circle. And it was so big they had like 2 stages for music, all kinds of arts and crafts. We just kind of spent the day in there. We ended up hiking up on the inside to the crater, to the top of the crater, which was really cool. There was probably Bill and I and 3 or 4 other people hiked up there, so that was, you know, beautiful view up there. And so that was kind of that. And then we ended up selling our car to a guy named, I think it was Danny, and he was a kid that, he was probably 16 or 17, and he was a kid that lived on Cocoa Isle Circle. And so I think we sold him the car for like $100 or something like that, what we paid for it. And so anyway, and another thing was, I think it was Molokai. No, that's an island. Makapu maybe, or anyway, you go out by Cocoa Isle Circle and Hanauma Bay and the Blowhole and Sandy Beach, and then there's another beach around there, and there was also kind of a SeaWorld type thing that had trained dolphins and stuff, and it was kind of over there too. But about every Wednesday they would have like a free concert in on that beach, and bands would play. And so that last month, Bill and I didn't have jobs, so we were just kind of hanging out. So we would go out there on Wednesdays. We were kind of hanging out with the local people at that point. And they did some mudsliding out there, which we didn't do, but it was fun to watch them. And they just run along the grass that was so wet, and then the grass eventually just turns to mud. But anyway, some people were having a pretty good time. And then Sunday afternoons, they'd have a free concert in the park down around Waikiki Beach, or a little farther down. They had a zoo down there towards Diamond Head, and there was a park down there, so we would go to that. And so it kind of got down to probably around January 2nd, we were using Aunt Bertha and Uncle Joe's address as a kind of a location, even though we weren't staying there, with the cruise line. And so they were supposed to leave from, I believe, Pier 10, which was down by that Aloha Tower. And so and so they called Joe and Bertha and left a message for Bill and I that this was January 2nd probably, and that on the 4th they were going to be leaving from what I thought was Pier 19, but I looked it up on the map and it's Pier 11. They might have changed some of these numbers in 40 years or 50 years. But we were very familiar with where that pier was because Bill had actually worked there a couple of times as a night watchman, and they had some golf carts down there, so we were kind of drag racing those golf carts around the pier, which was kind of fun at night. And so we must have checked in with them or something, or there's no cell phones or communication back then. They really had no way of getting a hold of us to relay that message, but somehow we got it. Maybe they told Danny or some of the other kids on that Cocoa Isle Circle that we'd kind of hang out with a little bit. And anyway, they got word to us that they were moving the ship over to this other pier when they're going to leave on the 4th. And Bertha was, I remember she told us that they were kind of all shocked, because it's like, oh my gosh, they really are going. They really are going. So one of the fun things that happened that December, remember our last day was December 10th on the job, was my parents actually came over to Hawaii, Lee and Faye Harder, during Christmas break, and they stayed with Joe and Bertha, Bertha was my mom's sister, younger sister. And so we got a chance to see them and all this kind of stuff and kind of say goodbye, and I don't know what they were thinking. I'm sure they were probably pretty nervous. Here we were just taking off for Australia. And one of the things we had to do was we had to mail our passports to San Francisco to get a visa to go to Australia. And back then, you just show up at a country and get in. You have to have a visa ahead of time. And so and there's only certain places you can get these visas. Like, you couldn't get an Australian visa in Hawaii. You had to go to San Francisco, was the closest place. And just like India, we could get those in Sydney, Australia. So we had to get, I think India, Pakistan, and Iran. We had to get those visas. No, I think we got India in Sydney. I think we got the others in New Delhi, India, capital of India. And so, so I do remember.